Chapter 5. We've talked about Nebuchadnezzar quite a bit. He had a dream, remember, in the second chapter. Daniel was able to remind him of his dream. Daniel himself has not had a dream, but he's been interpreting other people's dreams. Nebuchadnezzar had another dream about his own downfall, and he went mad for 7 years, and he grew claws instead of nails, looked like a wild beast, and he is a beast, of course. That's the low point then of human frailty. From the sanity of being genuinely human, he became an animal. And then we read how the 3 boys were thrown into the fire, the fiery furnace, which was heated 7 times hotter than normal. And we pointed, and I would make no apology at all for repeating Daniel 3:17, which says that our one Lord, these boys said, our one Lord will save us. And even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down to your idolatrous image. So that was a very clear stand, uncompromising stand on the one God. And Jews were willing to die for that, and Christians should be as well. Servetus, in fact, did die for the belief that God is one, not 3 in 1. So now in chapter 5, we have this. I'll read verse 1 of chapter 5.
Can you
Daniel?
just
Yes.
the thing you're so Anthony's doing next week a web episode with Trinitarian group.
It's not next week, it's September 10th, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they reminded me of September the 10th. It's a wepisode, it's called?
Yeah, episode.
It's a debate on the Trinity via streaming. I think no picture, probably just sound.
No, they have. It's
They
like
do
a
have pictures.
Skype session.
It's a Skype session,
recorded.
right. We'll announce that again next week. And these gentlemen are convinced that we are hopelessly lost if we don't subscribe to the Trinitarian idea. So that's on the 10th of September. We'll tell you more about that later. So Belshazzar 5:1 of Daniel. I read chapter 5 verse 1. Ask Barbara on my right to read verse 2. We'll go round and take a few verses and then make some comments. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000.
When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, in order that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them.
Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them.
As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing.
Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together.
The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, "Any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me will be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as the 3rd ruler in the kingdom."
Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant.
Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. Quite a remarkable passage here. Fairly self-explanatory, I think. Belshazzar is, of course, a very pagan name too. Bel is one of the gods of Babylon. Marduk and Bel. We find this in inscriptions from that time. And so Bel is your protector, something like that is the name of this king. He's probably the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, not the son, but by this time, please note that Daniel would be about 80 years old. So we've gone from the early chapter where he was a teenager, having been taken captive, exiled from the capture of Jerusalem with Nebuchadnezzar at that time. That's the exile, the great exile of Judah in 586 BC. And now then, Daniel will be 80 years old. He's had a wealth of experience. He's worked as an executive and a high up in the government of Babylon. So he made a great feast. Of course, that reminds us, I'm going to compare now with the feast here, the epitome of paganism, with the feast that you all know about, and that's in Isaiah 25. So let's just flick over there for a moment to remind ourselves of the parallel. Sometimes you can compare and contrast. We used to do that at school. We were to write an essay on a given subject, comparing and contrasting it. So that's useful. And I'm assuming that we will all have a chance somewhere down the line to deal with these verses. So you'll find in Isaiah 20, did I get the wrong verse? That's awful. 25.
25,
Verse 6, yes.
6 and 7.
The Lord of hosts, it says in Isaiah 26, actually. 25, verse 6. The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all peoples on this mountain. That would be in Palestine, in Israel. A banquet of aged wine, choice pieces with marrow, and refined aged wine. And on this mountain he will swallow up the covering which is over all peoples. That would be a veil of failure to understand, a veil of confusion and misunderstanding, even the veil which is stretched over all nations. And he will swallow up death for all time. That's a good idea, isn't it? Doesn't it say in 2 Timothy 1:10 that Jesus came with the gospel, by means of the gospel, to abolish death? Well, here's what he got the idea from. He will swallow up death for all time, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces. That's an amazing passage. There's the real banquet, right? That will be held on the earth at the second coming, when you will be introduced to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and all the saints of all the ages will gather together as immortals then. They will have been immortalized at that resurrection that occurs when Christ comes back, and the banquet will be held. I would think quite a show that would be. And this is the awful pagan counterpart, where this arrogant king, who's going to suffer for his arrogance, a great lesson, I think, for all of us. He's going to reverse all that. Jesus is going to reverse all that, not to mention reversing death and granting immortality. So tell your friends about immortality at that Methodist service where we attended just as interested tourists this morning. They sang a hymn about when we all get to heaven. I didn't actually get a chance. We didn't have time to say to the young fellow preaching that even Wesley said there's no Bible verse that says you go to heaven when you die. Wesley said that. But people are pretty careless with their founders, so they say it anyway because it sounds like a good hymn, when we all get to heaven. I would have said, wait a minute, blessed are the meek, they're going to inherit the earth. And all of this is going to be enacted out on a renewed earth. So that's really a comforting thing, and that's not just boring doctrine, that's your life. The more truth you have on your lips and in your heart, the more energy you're going to have. And the more error you have in your heart and life, the more poison you have in your system. You're killing yourself. So it pays to believe the truth. That would seem to be the point. Okay, what else have we got here? The gold you see these vessels that they're drinking out of? You can just see the raised, what's the word, dais at the top, the raised table at the top of the room, where the king and his various women, which is unusual, by the way, to have the women at the feast, but they did here. They were all there, and here he is drinking out of the very vessels that belong to God's temple in Israel. That's pretty bad, isn't it?
Because he had sacked it.
Yes, he ruined it. Yes, of course. His grandfather had, not he. His grandfather had.
He destroyed the temple.
Yeah. Yes, and that was, of course, the first temple had been built by Solomon.
First temple.
It was destroyed in 586, around that time.
And just looking at the quantity, it sounds to me like they're providing gold goblets and so on for all the guests.
Yes.
1,000.
1,000 people.
1,000.
This is incredible. Yeah, this is not a.
This is lavish. This is not a picnic on a beach. This is lavish, but this is what famous people can do and go wrong with it in this case. All of that comes from verse 3. The temple of the house of God, which in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his consorts, his other women, drank from them. And they drank the wine. Now, if it isn't bad so far, it gets even worse now. They drank the wine, and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. What does that remind you of? Chapter number 2, the great vision, where the end of that awful statue, representing a succession of kingdoms, involved then those various items: silver, bronze, iron. Silver, bronze, of course, was the Greek kingdom. The third one, iron. The last one, presumably a renewed future Greek-Syrian kingdom in the Middle East. And they're praising those gods. That's what you don't want to do. That, of course, is a crime against the laws of God. It's criminal, and the penalty is death for that.
Break the first commandment.
Breaks the first commandment. What Jesus called the great commandment. Again, show your friends in Mark 12:29. Jesus was asked, what is the great commandment? The one you mustn't get wrong. And guess what? It's the Lord our God is one Lord.
I was thinking of the first of the 10 words.
It's also the first of the 10 words in Exodus. Exactly right. The first commandment. You must not misdefine God on peril of death. Suddenly then, the story moves on very quickly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged, began writing on the alabaster. This would have been the white surface of this probably 12-foot high wall in the banquet room. These were very lavish buildings. These people were not short of funds, apparently. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. It scared the wits out of him, as you see. I love the description here. It's humorous. Face got pale. Thoughts alarmed him. He was really troubled. Hip joints went slack. You've got to be pretty scared before that happens, I would think. And his knees began knocking together.
Reminds me of the skeleton during Halloween.
Yes.
And cartoons.
Yes.
Shaky.
So what does the king do? He brings in all of these magicians, all of these counselors who are various forms of pagan advisors. Chaldeans were the religious class. All the PhDs in religion came in, the diviners, those who were fortune tellers. And the king said to these wise men of Babylon, that's the best that Babylon could do, right? The top people in Babylon, so-called wise men. Any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me will be clothed with purple, that's royalty, and have a necklace of gold around his neck, and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. I'll promote him to the top position. Now, the opposite and parallel to this, of course, is that true Christians will be promoted to these positions in the kingdom. So you want to use the verses almost never preached, I seldom heard it preached, in Revelation 2:26 and 27, Jesus said, the one who overcomes, I will reward him by giving him power over the nations, just as God gave me authority to rule the nations, gave Jesus, that is. So I share that authority to rule the nations with a rod of iron. I've never heard a sermon on that. I don't know why. That's the Christian reward. A very different thing from playing harps on pink clouds in the sky, I would think. So the verses that get no press practically are the ones that you have to emphasize. People, in fact, tend to have a very sparse knowledge of the Bible. They've been given John 3:16. They know that one. The Lord is my shepherd. They certainly know. But there are 31,000 verses in the Bible. Most of those they've never heard and never thought about. So we need to emphasize those ones that don't get enough press, I think. Okay, the wise men came in. They couldn't read it. Now that reminds me of a very nice little verse in Isaiah 29. Just go back to Isaiah 29. That speaks loud to us, I think, in these days of confusion. In Isaiah 29, verse 11, says the following: the entire vision will be to you like the words of a sealed book, which when they give it to the one who is literate, the man with a PhD, the educated person, he says, please read this for me. He says, I can't. I don't know what this is about. I don't understand it. Then the book will be given to the uneducated, saying, please read this for me. And he'll say, I have no idea what this is about. Are we at that kind of point? Then the Lord said, if you want to know why this is true, here in verse 13, because this people draws near with their words and honor me with their lip service, and they remove their heart or mind from me, and their reverence, their church services, their preaching, their reverence for me, consists in traditions learned by heart. That's the problem. If you learn a whole lot of poisonous traditions, it's going to put a veil over your eyes when you read the Bible. You won't be able to understand it. That seems to be what has happened here. However, Daniel, being the one exception here, along with his 3 colleagues, he substitute holy gods, the one true God. The spirit and mind and intelligence of the one Creator is in Daniel. He's a true believer, and guess what? He knows what this awful episode on the wall actually means. I like the fact that, let's read verse 10 now. Who's got verse 10?
The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles. The queen spoke and said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale.
There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods.
Yes.
Your father, King Nebu, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners."
Yes. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. That's wonderful. This is supposed to be the model Christian. The model true believer is flying high above all the nonsense. He's got the confidence that comes from understanding when other people don't. And Daniel had that, and they recognized it. This man knew what he was talking about. The rest of them didn't. So they call him in, and guess what he's going to be able to do? He's going to understand what this awful handwriting on the wall meant. I want to point out here that the Spirit of God did not begin at Pentecost, one of the errors we come across during the week. Notice that nothing happened until Pentecost. It's false. How do you think that Jesus sent the apostles out to raise the dead and to preach the kingdom without the Spirit? I'm referring to the Gospels now. The Spirit of God was in Zechariah, Elizabeth, and Mary when they sang those songs, very active. Now, the Spirit was not given from the risen Christ until later. That's true. There is a new event at Pentecost where the risen Messiah at the right hand is given the Spirit. He's pouring that out on those who obey him, because Acts 5:22 says, the Spirit is given to those who obey Jesus. That's it. So it's not given to those who disobey Jesus. Therefore, it's extremely unwise to oppose the notion of water baptism, which is a very easy, basic doctrine. Repent is a command, be baptized, and you'll get the Spirit. If you don't, you won't get the Spirit. That's easy. So my point here is that the Spirit of the holy gods, as the pagans saw it, that Spirit of God, was available in great measure when Jesus was there, because Jesus baptized people. Jesus himself was baptized, and in John 1:33 it says that Jesus is the one who gives Spirit. He's the one who baptizes in Spirit. I don't think it means he's going to baptize you in Spirit 3.5 years later. Jesus, John the Baptist said, is the one who baptizes, immerses, overwhelms and drowns, if you like, in Spirit. And then John 6:63, the words that I speak to you are spirit and life. So it's a fatal thing to have a sort of a dead Jesus wandering around preaching but not conveying any spirit. That's terribly rad. Anyway, this king at least was clever enough to see that Daniel was one in whom the Spirit of the living God was active. So let's see how this dream comes out then.
Just before we go on, verse 11 puzzles me, because it sounds like Belshazzar's wife is telling him something that wasn't necessarily familiar to him.
Yeah.
And not to have understood what happened to his grandfather is to me a real puzzle, because that would have been the greatest lesson he could ever have learned against arrogance.
Supposing she's wanting to make that known to the new audience. There are 1,000 people there who perhaps didn't all know.
Okay.
possible. I have no idea. But I mean,
Some
she could.
comments about that.
Yes.
Michelle says, of course, it was a woman who had the good memory.
Yes. Yeah, but obviously I don't know. You'd have to ask. But it could be that she very cleverly wanted the 1,000 people there to hear it. So she reports that fact. It doesn't necessarily mean that nobody else knew that.
Ben Shaw says the king was lucky to have a queen who was thinking.
Yeah. Critically.
Michelle adds, it's interesting that she wasn't in there partying with them. She entered the room when she heard all the commotion.
That's interesting, actually.
And apparently, at least according to my Bible, this queen is Belshazzar's mother.
Okay, the Queen Mother.
Oh, Daniel's one?
No, the Queen
Belshazzar's
Mother.
the king's mother.
The king's
Not the
mother.
king's
What's
wife.
Daniel's
Because
name?
all the wives we've just been told were here at the
Yes.
feast.
That's a
and
good
in
point.
concubines.
It's a great point. The wives were there at the banquet.
This is the
However, the Queen Mother came in.
Queen, but it doesn't tell us.
No.
So I think it makes sense
Yes.
because she would have been
Queen
of the
Mother.
previous generation, so she
Yes.
would remember Daniel.
Yes.
Apparently
Yes.
more than the other ones.
In England, we would refer to her as the Queen Mother.
The Queen Mother, right.
Not the wife, but she was the
That's
Queen
right,
Mother.
the Queen Mother. But she still could be called the Queen. She comes in from outside of the event there, apparently.
Right.
Gets wind of the story, and she certainly remembers, and she wants everybody among thousands that she addresses, presumably, to be aware of what happened before to Nebuchadnezzar. That's a possible interpretation. Otherwise, you're going to have to ask at the Messianic banquet, because I don't know, it doesn't say. It doesn't ultimately matter, but it's an interesting thing to ponder as you sort of piece the story together from the information we have here. They're very nice about Daniel, verse 12. An extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams. The Proverbs are full of that. Proverbs 11:9, for example. I mean, you need to ponder the Proverbs a lot because there's a huge emphasis, I was trying to say, on getting knowledge right. And people say, oh, that's just boring intellectual stuff. Well, if it isn't accompanied by a heartfelt element in your thinking, I see that. However, knowledge is very important. Proverbs 11:9 is just one verse. Proverbs 11:9 says, with his mouth the godless man destroys his neighbor. That's the negative side. But through knowledge the righteous will be saved, will be delivered. So how important is knowledge? Extremely important. And if you're taking any notes there, I'll add Isaiah 53:11, which is not given any publicity at all. Isaiah 53:11, speaking of the suffering servant Jesus, it says, by his knowledge he will make many righteous. Please note, by his knowledge, not by stirring up a frenzy of fluffy emotion, although there is an emotional content, obviously, but by his knowledge. So how important is knowledge? Well, you get saved by knowledge, according to this proverb, and Isaiah 53:11 gets no press at all. I mean, how come John 3:16 is so popular? Why isn't Isaiah 53:11 as popular? There's a reason for this, because people are being fed scraps of Scripture, and they hang their whole theology around a very few verses to the exclusion of a great number that really ought to be in there, I think, as well.
Well, the ones you quoted in Revelation 2,
Yes.
it says, whoever obeys
Yes.
my words, which connotes teaching, right?
Of course.
Connotes-
Obeying
it's
words
very
is
important.
nothing to say except
The words of
obeying.
Jesus are very important.
We could do that for several hours. We could listen. One Sunday we should do that. I mean, John 12 is the obvious place. John 12, at the summary of his ministry, John 12:44, he raises his voice, which he normally doesn't do. He says, for goodness sake, don't miss my words. My words, my words. What I'm saying are the words that are going to judge you. So get used to that idea. If you want to be judged favorably, you're going to concentrate on the words of God through Jesus and the words of Paul.
Yeah, I was going
as well.
to say that it's interesting to me that the words of Jesus.
Yes.
So Jesus spends all of his time,
Of course.
in the Gospels,
Mm.
right, doing something.
Yes.
And it's not telling people how to feel good
No.
or how to fix your marriage and, how
Well,
to
I'm sure he
get-
could do that too, but that's not the
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure he had words about that.
Community organized. No, he's teaching something, right?
Oh, yes.
And it's called the kingdom of God, the gospel. So it's interesting to me that the words of Jesus have been supplanted with a feeling about Jesus.
Yes.
So where did that come from?
Well, it comes from the lies of the devil.
But
just
specifically, Jesus is my boyfriend sort of stuff.
Yes,
like,
it's a sloppy, emotional, I believe in the person of Jesus. You'll read that in evangelical literature. I believe in the person of Jesus, but not his teaching. That is just arrant nonsense. That's a quick way to be confused. And so Jesus spends a lot of his time saying, listen to me, my word. Beware of false preachers. Listen to me. What I say is true. What these other people say is false. It couldn't be actually much clearer. I think our good friend, the history teacher out there who streams with us, will understand this particularly well because he's a teacher.
Imagine, so you're a professor. You've been a professor for decades. Imagine you overhear your students after your classes and
it's
go,
crazy.
you know, doesn't Anthony make you feel good?
Yeah,
and, you know, great, Anthony. So,
No,
and you're like in their hours, sweating it out, trying to teach them something, and they're like, Anthony's so great, it makes me feel so good.
I believe in his person.
I believe in his person, but not his teaching, yes.
What he said. Yes, good.
Yeah. Well, of course, there should be emotion. There should be emotion involved in this, obviously. If it's just a boring intellectual exercise, that's wrong on the other side of the coin.
Well, guess what? Jesus is very emotional about the gospel, about the kingdom.
Absolutely.
That is the driving thing of him going to people and saying, change your ways, man.
Absolutely.
Or to the Jews saying, look, these people are hypocrites. It's not about rules and regulations all the time. It's about obeying.
Well, it's about obeying, of course. I'm going to read it because we've got onto this topic, and I'll be accused of getting off topic. Off topic, but Jesus needs to be heard in John 12:44. This through the email this week. I've been appalled because people are saying, no, the gospel doesn't come from Jesus. It comes from Paul. And they will argue that. Wait a minute. John 12:44. Jesus cried out. He yelled. He didn't do that normally. He who believes in me doesn't believe in me, but in the one who sent me. Isn't that a clever way to teach? The one who believes in me doesn't believe in me, meaning doesn't ultimately believe in me, but the authority is greater than me. It's the Father who sent me. He who sees me sees the one who sent me. Okay, so then the UPC people said the Son must be the Father. No. He's not the Father. No Son can be the same as his Father. That's not possible. He who sees me, that's to say receives what I say and understands me, is understanding the one, not the two or the three, but the one who sent me, that's the Father. I have come as light into the world. And in parentheses I add, you're supposed to be the light of the world too. I, Jesus, have come as light into the world, so that everyone who believes in me will not remain in darkness. So you make a choice. You want to be ignorant, then choose ignorance and remain in darkness. Then he says, if anyone hears my sayings, I mean, I don't know how he could have said this clearly. If anybody hears my sayings, including the whole gospel of the kingdom and everything that goes with it, and also the fact that the kingdom is supposed to be present now as well as future in a different sense. The kingdom is supposed to be in your life now. The words that I speak to your spirit and life, it's a down payment. Of course, the kingdom is mainly future. We know that. But anyone who denies or hears my sayings in verse 47 and doesn't keep them,
that's Revelation 2, right?
of course, argues that the gospel is not from Jesus, from Paul. I've seen this very week from people who've been in the Bible for years and years, and they still cannot get this right. He says, I don't judge him. I didn't come to judge. That's true. That's not what he came essentially to do. I didn't come to judge the world. I came to save the world. I get it. Through his words. He who rejects me, then he explains what that is. He who rejects me and does not receive my sayings. So if you want to accept Jesus, wouldn't you have to accept his sayings, you see? This is very clear. This should be read to the children every Sunday, because it's so clear. He who rejects me doesn't receive my sayings, has one who judges him. The word that I spoke, every word of Jesus, summarized as the word about the gospel of the kingdom, parable of the sower, and everything about loving your enemy, even not killing your enemy in wartime, that's part of the words of Jesus.
Amen.
Even that judges him. The words that I spoke to him will judge him at the last day. My goodness, we're going to stand in front of that cord, and these words will be our judge. Because I didn't speak, in verse 49, on my own initiative, but the Father himself, who commissioned me, has given me a commandment as to what to say and what to speak. I get it. He's getting his instructions from the Father. He isn't the Father. That's just silly. The UPC did quite badly when they said the Father is the Son. No, no, no. He's representing the Father. Verse 50, I know that his commandment is eternal life. That's John 17:3. This is eternal life, that they believe in you, Father, as the only true God, the only one who is true God, and you also believe in Jesus Christ, who is the Messiah, clearly. So, verse 50 once more. I know that his commandment is eternal life, means eternal life. Therefore, the things that I speak just as the Father has told me. Isn't that an amazing section of Scripture? Well, Daniel was doing that sort of exercise in our chapter. He was telling these people what this message
I got
was.
some comments.
Good. Great.
Let's see. Daniel 12:3.
Yes.
Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness
Excellent.
of the expanse. That's Randy.
Yes.
Dan Shaw.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel must have been retired and out of circulation when this event took place. Else the king would have, or what would the king have thought of it?
Yes. He was in his ages. Yes.
Decca, I'm not sure the real name, says, Anthony makes me feel so dreamy.
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 Okay.
You're dreamy.
Okay.
It's joking.
It's a takeoff.
I'll try to do better.
I like,
it's
no, it's
joking.
from what I was saying about
Yes.
Jesus. who
Professor,
finds
isn't about how
Yeah.
it makes you feel.
You're about your students, a thing I was
It's
saying.
about your words.
No, this is humor back to humor.
Yeah.
So I'll try to do better.
Dan Shaw's got a great line that I just stole. I'm just letting
Yeah.
you know that. Passionate is emotionally charged sense of duty.
Yes.
Love that.
That's very good.
And
Yes.
Decca again, prayer band, the band, prayer
Yes.
bands,
Yeah.
and altar call comes first, then a reiteration of John 3:16 and Romans 10. I think they're
Yes.
describing
The
and
evangelical method.
some quote laughter anointing.
Yes.
L.A. I think
Yeah.
this person's of Los Angeles. Is that Los Angeles or Louisiana? Is crazy.
No, laughter.
Laughter.
Oh, laughter
Laughter
anointing.
anointing is crazy.
Laughter
Okay.
anointing.
I
LA.
agree.
That's exactly
I
right.
thought
Yeah.
that's just-
Well,
I agree.
if we do go on about this every week, forgive me, because there are new people listening every week. We have to keep repeating this. I'm so glad that Randy, you see, brought exactly the right verse there. In Daniel 12:3, you have the same idea as Isaiah 53:11. The one who has knowledge, that's Jesus in that case in 53:11, makes many righteous. Daniel 12:3 is exactly right. Those who have insight will cause the righteous to do well. It's the same thing. You must have insight, you must have knowledge. Of course, that's not without emotion. So I like the quote there about passionate emotion. I should add a compliment to my Jewish friend, Tovia Singer, if you look him up sometime.
Oh,
He
this
is
guy
very
passionate.
much incensed against evangelicalism,
He's got a lot of-
Trinitarian evangelicalism. This is a Jewish apologist. And he's as incensed as I am against the futile arguments that one really means more than one. And he has a very good section this week, a new video from Tovia Singer, which his site is called, I think, what? Anti-missionary site, something like that.
Oh, yeah. So-
He's as angry as I am against the idea that echad, one, really means more than one. For example, one cluster of grapes proves that one means more than one. All right, tell your friends, please, that one loaf of bread means one loaf of bread. One loaf of sliced bread doesn't mean that one means more than one. Got it? It's still one loaf of sliced bread, not two. See, this is a cheap trick. It's a card-sharp exercise. Paul warned against the sleight of hand of false teaching.
That's what
That's
he
the
says.
image. Yeah.
He describes it as
Card
the
shop.
people who have the cups
Yes?
and they move the
They move,
bowl or
right.
whatever around. That's what Tovia said. That
That's right.
it's a trick. They're
Of course.
tricksters.
Well, he didn't perhaps know that Paul said the same thing. Paul warns against the card sharp, against the sleight of hand. Warn your children then, they've got to be alert to the possibility of swallowing lies instead of truth. Okay, back to the text here. That was a bit of a diversion.
I have some good headings. My Bible has headings for the chapter, for the
Yes.
verses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Belshazzar's contribution to the feast is unrestrained sensuality.
Yes.
Then God's contribution to the
4.
feast, right, is handwriting on the wall, 5 and 6. Then Daniel's contribution to the feast is the announcement of doom. That's 7 through
Nice.
29. And then at the end we have Darius's contribution to the feast is
Yeah.
destruction of Babylon.
Yeah, very good. That's from the MacArthur Study Bible.
Ryrie.
Ryrie Study Bible, they have some good comments on that particular topic. All right, what happens then? We're in 5, I get lost here. 13. Who's going to read 13?
I think that was me.
Okay, Sarah's going to read verse 13.
Barbara. Okay.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah?"
Now I have heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you.
Mm-hmm.
The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it.
But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you're able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Keep your gifts for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation
Okay.
known."
The Bible all about kingdoms and who gets to rule in the kingdom. Here the king is offering high positions. This is Revelation 2, 26 and 27. I don't apologize for repeating it, because it gets no press at all. Ask your pastor to preach 6 weeks on Revelation 2, 26 and 27. The one who overcomes, the Christian here, Jesus speaking to Christians, Revelation 2, 26, 27, "I will give him authority over the nations to rule them with a rod of iron, just as God gave that to me, Jesus." So you say to your friends, "Do you want to be like Jesus?" "Oh yes," they say, "I want to be like Jesus." Well, have you read this verse? Being like Jesus, in Revelation 2, 26, 27, is having the same authority granted to you in the future to discipline the nations for their own good. And that reminds me of Barbara's good campaign against abortion. Wouldn't you like to be able to help some person not to get pregnant outside of marriage and not to threaten that baby with an abortion? You're going to be able to do that with much greater authority and effectiveness then than you can do now. But that's a great blessing to correct somebody who is proposing to murder the baby in her womb. Don't want to do that. Bad idea.
You know what strikes me about this book that I've been studying a lot because of the I guess what do you call it,
Preterism. That's things in the past.
preterists use this book. What strikes me about Daniel, which I used to sort of be wary of prophecy. Remember, I told you that I don't really. It's not that I don't like the scripture, but like Revelation, I was wary of. And you used to tell me, look, you got to get the whole the counsel. Anyway, what strikes me about Daniel is it's the gospel.
No, of course.
It's all about the
Absolutely.
gospel. It's all, you just said kingdoms.
It's all about kingdom.
Kingdom everywhere. The
It is.
dreams, the vision,
Yes,
the great Daniel 7
Yes.
vision.
yes.
So
all
it's
about
really the essence
Absolutely.
of Jesus
Yeah.
preaching.
And you could learn the negative side from how not to do the kingdom is Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. How not to do the kingdom. And how to do the kingdom we're going to get to in Daniel chapter 7. Not today, but that's going to be a very rich chapter.
Sorry, just some more comments.
Yes,
here.
what do you got?
Jay in Australia, thanks for
Wow.
tuning in. It's very late there, probably early in the morning. Thank you. The Trinity is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then he says John 12:44 is a bit of a conversation starter. Agency and authority.
Yes, it's
Yes.
terrific. Exactly right.
Dan Shaw, Trinis are unfortunately idolaters, believing in a God that does not exist. How sad. Same as worshiping an idol, says Tony Bold. Is that the pastor?
No.
Is it number one?
One?
That's
So
Dennis.
Pastor Dennis?
Yes.
Make it with a hammer or ink and pen it, it's still the same, it's an idol.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, that's a good point.
And
That will spur us on. And all of this course is to be taught with kindness. Paul said we're to teach kindly the people who oppose, but we should teach them the truth against that.
You saying that reminds me of Tavia,
Yeah.
who in this video, if you watch it, is a bit funny because he's so incensed
Yes.
with the tricksters.
Yes.
He says, but listen, I'm angry.
Yes.
Angry, he says,
Yes.
but I'm angry at the apologies.
Yeah.
Be kind to the Christian, to the majority, because
Yeah.
they don't know. They're
Yeah.
like children. He said,
Yeah.
but, sorry, Barbara.
Yes.
I was just going to say we have that make known phrase
Yes.
again in verse 17,
Yes.
which is so interesting because it's all about the gospel, as
Yeah.
you just said, and
Right.
it's about making known, and that is our job description as
It is
well.
to make known.
There's no mystery there. We have to.
Make known.
Make it
It's
known.
the Matthew 13 one that Jesus
Yeah.
said, to you have been made known the mysteries of the kingdom. It's exactly the same language.
Just a little bit about this make known.
Yes,
The Bible is all about making known.
Oh.
Yes.
The church is supposed to be open door.
of course.
Supposed to be, right? Yes, we gather as a community, as a group, brothers and sisters, spiritually speaking, but it's, so if we, that's why cults are so dangerous, right? So if you close yourself off, but about the revealing thing, yes, that's the whole point. So why would God give a gospel, right? If it's bound up in all kinds of too intricate things. And same goes with God. I was just saying to Sarah, if you look at the second part of John 1, the prologue, as they call it. If you look at the second part, post-incarnation, what's it about? Why was Jesus born? Well, John says to reveal God.
Absolutely.
But the Trinity, the Orthodox, the majority of Christians are told the complete opposite.
Yep, a
That
mystery.
God is, look, just don't ask for it. No, Jesus says John was born to reveal John 1:18.
Yep.
You know, he's the one at the closest, the most intimate. For what? To reveal the Father. But if the Father is unknown, it's an unknown God. Sorry.
Press on. You have to press on.
Revelation.
Absolutely.
I must say that at our early morning church service on the beach,
Yes.
which there were at least 50 people,
Yes.
the pastor said to the group, well, I see, like good Methodists,
Yes.
none of you has brought your Bible.
Yes, he said that.
So I'll read it to you.
They laugh at it.
Yeah.
I mean, they make jokes.
These are very genuine people. They're trying very hard to do well. They lack instruction. That's what I was getting from watching these people on the beach this morning. 50 of them Methodists. And so we can do our part.
By the way, Anthony, the J online
Yeah.
Australia is the fellow who left his Baptist church. Remember we commented?
Yes.
We do.
So keep it up.
Keep it up. Yeah, we're thrilled with your story, Jay. I wish we could meet you. It's a long way from over there. So let me give you this idea. What is the most powerful thing in the world? That question at once conjures up mind pictures of bombs and battleships, guns and explosives. It's none of these things. They are merely instruments. Behind them is the mind that uses them. And their use or disuse will depend on the ideas in that mind. Therefore, the most powerful thing in the world is an idea. In the beginning was an idea. Behind the ships at Boulogne, waiting for the invasion of England, more than 100 years ago, was the mind of Napoleon. The prevailing idea in that mind was the domination of Europe. Excellent. That's a historian, actually, and a bishop in the Church of England writing. The idea, the mind of Jesus is the idea of the kingdom, of having peace on earth and goodwill towards everybody in that day. That's what we're waiting for. There's no other idea or mind that is comparable with that. Okay.
Just a couple more. Decca, how do organizations avoid using type antitype method of interpretation of Daniel, like JW's. They apply prophecies in Revelation and Daniel specifically and exclusively to their organizations.
Well, that's just part of their misunderstanding. You've got to undermine the entire concept that the watchtower is God's only faithful servant. Unless you can undermine that, then you're not going to get to that point. That's right. There is typology in the Bible, as we know. All sorts of patterns, I would call them. Paul said that the rock that followed them in the wilderness was Christ. That's typological language. Paul says that there. He says, I'm speaking typically, typikos in Greek, in types, patterns. God works in patterns. So he has a virgin birth in Isaiah 7, and he has a real and fully fashioned virgin birth in Matthew and Luke. That's clear. God then seems to have patterns, and so type and antitype are patterns. The Exodus in Egypt, of course, is a type of a future Exodus that the now unbelieving Jews will experience when Christ comes back. So there's lots of typology. But getting to the watchtower is very hard, because they've been told, on pain of loss of salvation, that if they give up the watchtower, they're sunk. They're done in. That's hard to break through. Okay. We've got a few more verses to read here. Which is the next verse? I get to turning to other places and I forget where we are sometimes. 18?
Actually 9. Yeah, 18, I'll read it. Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebu sovereignty, greatness, glory, splendor. 19.
Yes. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished to be elevated, and whomever he wished to be humbled.
But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him.
He was also driven away from mankind, and his heart was made like that of beasts, and his dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes.
Mm-hmm.
But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. 20.
But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of God's house before you and your nobles. Your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and your ways you have not glorified. That's a good sermon, isn't it? Excellent sermon. Reminds me of James, if you just put in your mark, James 4 verse 10, James 4:10 says, humble yourself in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. So there's that same antithesis. Humble yourself in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you.
What would that look like? Humbling yourself in the presence.
Well, it would certainly try not to be arrogant, wouldn't it? Arrogance is the worst thing. A know-it-all, somebody who thinks, especially if they're very young and they think they know it all, they have the least right to know it all. And so humility takes different forms.
I think as a former agnostic, give up what you have been taught.
Yes.
And believe.
Of course. It's always that. That's repent and believe the gospel.
That's what humble looks like.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, of course, you're right.
Well,
that too.
It depends on different circumstances, of course. Humble yourself. But the whole pattern in Scripture is that the pride comes before a fall. We've seen that. We've seen living examples of colossal arrogance and pride. And it's a disaster.
See, I think one of the prophets in the Old Testament, or I think maybe the Psalm when God says things like, "Be still and know I am God."
Yes.
Things like that, like you start questioning.
Yes.
things because you hear or people teach you some things
Right.
about creation or whatever.
Right.
But God says, look, I'm God, just relax,
Relax.
obey and
Right.
believe me.
Mhm.
So that's what humble.
Well, that's the line about don't imagine yourself to be better than you should. Have a right assessment of who you are. That's very good.
Also, Abraham, I love it when Abraham is before God.
Yeah.
He says, I'm just dust and ashes, Lord.
Yes.
That's a, I
That
love
is good. I'm going to
Oh,
dust and
that's
ashes.
it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Paul's line is exactly, precisely. It comes to me now. It says, "Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to." Sit down and assess who you are in the light of what you do and your background and everything, and get a right assessment. Of course, you can go the other way. You can say, "Oh, I'm not nothing. I'm not doing
Right,
nothing."
too much.
That's a false humility. On the other hand, being proud as a human being in the wrong sense. It's extraordinary, this book, because there's two kings. I mean, you couldn't make the lesson more powerful, could you? Belshazzar suffered terribly. We haven't got to the end here. Nebuchadnezzar was completely undone for 7 years before he got the point.
25.
Okay, 25. We're nearing the end of this chapter. Then the hand. Who is that?
Oh,
We haven't
sorry.
done it yet.
24, I think.
22 word?
24.
24.
Yeah, yeah.
Then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out.
Now this is the inscription that was written out. Many, many tikal ufarsin.
Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. 20.
Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient.
Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians.
Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain.
Yes.
31.
31. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. Good history there. Darius the Mede. This is now the kingdom following the Babylonian kingdom, right? This is back to our image in chapter 2. We started with, you are the head of gold. That's Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonian king is number 1. Number 2 then comes Medo-Persia. Here it is, Medo-Persia. It's a Western Asian affair. The idea of Rome being involved here is probably wrong. The whole story is a Western Asian affair, not Western, as in Rome, not the Roman Empire. So prophecy studies have generally, I think, now accepted the correction there. One tends to look at the Antichrist as the bad guy living in your time. The one you don't like is the Antichrist. Well, Rome was perceived to be bad in many ways. I'm sure it had its terrible faults. When Charlemagne, I think in 800 AD, was crowned king, emperor by the Pope, things had gone badly astray because the Pope had no business as a Christian taking charge of this world. That's a vastly bad form of amillennialism. Wait until Jesus takes charge of the world. So the thing had gone wrong. However, Darius the Mede then is the lawful successor. He's 62 years old. We're now into the second kingdom, and you're ready then for the third kingdom. Not today. The third kingdom is going to be Greece, Alexander the Great, and he's going to be the goat. Easy for the children to remember. GGG, goat, Greece, Alexander the Great. One of my students in the class said, well, how about Alexander the Goofball? He died at the age of 300, not the age of 300, sorry. He died at the age of 33 in the year 323 on the 28th of June, 323 BC. He died weeping because there was no more world to conquer. That is a low point of madness. What in the world was he thinking? So watch out. Your ambition should not be killing and destroying more of the world than anybody else, much less having 1,000 people drinking themselves into a stupor at a banquet using the stolen vessels from God's temple. These are awful things. Then the idolatry lesson, do not worship a false God. Only worship the one God of Israel. That gets you at least on the right foot.
I have a lot of
Okay.
stuff here.
What do we got?
Let's see. Okay, so knocking Trinitarianism, I think we got it. Let's see. Okay, JWs have misinterpreted a lot of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, they're having a conversation. I'm just trying to see.
Spark some interest out there.
I was going to mention verse 18. This phrase, correct me if I'm wrong, the phrase sovereignty, greatness, glory, splendor,
yes,
comes up a lot. It has come up a lot.
Yes.
Right? And this is in reference to God giving Nebu sovereignty, so rulership, greatness, glory. This phrase always reminds me of the topic that we need to, as you say, always stress that Christians will be giving glory, honor. And so it's known, you say it's known as supremacy of Israel.
Yes.
Topic.
Yes.
And one of the passages I really like is in Isaiah 60.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you.
Mm-hmm.
See, darkness covers the earth, thick darkness is over the peoples, but the Lord rises upon you, and His glory appears over you."
Yes.
And then the clincher, the nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness, and this translation says, of your dawn.
Of course.
And so that idea that this pagan king is given all the things that we will be given, is quite striking.
It's very striking.
This idea of the supremacy of the church, known as the Israel of God.
Yes.
And you have, as you well know, we have all kinds of verses like 1 Peter is a big one about 1:7.
The most direct reference is in Daniel 7, so we finish with that one.
Right.
Because you made the comment about receiving the kingdom, getting the kingdom.
Yeah.
And 7:18, again, this is to be preached every Sunday several times. The saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom. That's exactly the language that you just read there about Darius receiving the kingdom. And possess the kingdom. That's blessed are the meek, they're going to possess the earth forever, for all ages. And down then in verse 22, the time came when the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Why didn't I hear this preached in church? This is rather staggering. The saints are going to possess the kingdom. And then finally, as if it needed to be said again, which really ought not to, but people don't know it, after a period of time, times and half a time, a final 3.5 year period in verse 27, then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven, that would be on a renewed earth, will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. Their kingdom, it should read, the translations went a bit feeble, some of them here. Not just his kingdom, God's kingdom. Their kingdom is the natural sense. Because of verse 18, you've just read that the saints are taking possession of the kingdom. It's their kingdom. So their kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions will serve and obey them as Jesus and the saints. I haven't heard that preached in church very loud.
Daniel 7.
When
you come back.
Yeah.
Or is that?
Yes. We'll get to Daniel 7.
We got some comments here.
Yes.
Someone's asking if you happen to know when Jerusalem was sacked in 586.
586.
607. I think there were like three.
Carchemish, I think, is 605. J.W.'s got that date wrong, and they got the 1914 thing based on that. 605, the Battle of Carchemish, 586, it's in that time period.
I thought they were referring to, because first he what's it called? He didn't capture it. He made 2 incursions, and then the third one just destroyed.
It's over a period of years. MacArthur's study Bible or the Ryder study Bible would have those facts. Get yourself a good study Bible. Holman study Bible is good.
Yeah, because Daniel 1, when I did,
yes.
I mentioned that this was the first incursion that brought Daniel and his party's over.
Unfortunately, the Jehovah's Witnesses, if we should have any listening out there, calculated a period of 2,520 years from a wrong date. They had no business, as I understand it, calculating anything as 20 years, but they said that in prophecy all days must mean years. That was a mistake. So that whole 1914 thing failed, and when it reached a point of desperation in 1980 or 1970 or even 1948, then they said, well, it's now an extended period. So the generation they thought should end 40 years later than 1914 has now been called a doubled or extended one. Well, it's going to run out of time again. So that's very sad. If you make a mistake at date setting, then have the courtesy and the humility to say we were wrong. Start over. So we thank everybody out there. I cannot believe that us people in Australia can be hearing what we're doing in this department.
Of course, where is it? There's a lot of people online. I saw something about. Well, regarding the arrogance thing, someone points to Galatians 6:13. If anyone thinks he's something, when he's nothing, he's nothing.
Yes, good.
Yeah,
good
don't
one.
take that too far.
Right, that is a good verse.
It's still. Do you wanna move on to 6 since you won't be here next, and then you can start with 7. We still have.
We got a few minutes. We could go into 6. Why not?
20 minutes.
We've got 20 minutes.
You wanna?
Yes.
Because.
Yes.
Yeah, for those coming in late, Anthony will be away next Sunday.
Yes.
So when he comes back, he'll probably be doing the much.
Chapter 7 will be fun, and then there will be areas in 10, 11. I don't know how to deal with all of that. I don't think anybody that I've read got a clear answer, but we'll speculate as best we can.
So this is Daniel in the den?
Daniel in the lion's den. Another story of escape through faith. Just like 3:17, where our one Lord was able to save the 3 men from the fire. Chapter 6, it seemed good to Darius, I'll read verse 1, the one who just arrived as a new king, to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom. Again, Revelation 2:26, 27 is parallel. What about verse 2?
And over them 3 commissioners, of whom Darius was one. Daniel. Sorry. That these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss.
Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom.
At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent.
These men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God.
Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: King Darius, live forever.
All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den.
Now, your majesty, issued the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Yes. Then, therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. 19.
Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house, now in his roof chamber.
Yes.
He had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously.
Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God.
12.
So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?
The king replied, "Statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." 13.
Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day.
Then, as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him.
15.
Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed."
Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you."
A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing might be changed in regard to Daniel.
Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him.
At the first light of dawn, the king got up, hurried to the lion's den.
And when he'd come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?"
Then Daniel spoke to the king, "O king, live forever."
My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime.
23.
The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God.
The king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast them, their children and their wives, into the lion's den. And they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. 25.
Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land, "May your peace abound."
I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever.
He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions.
So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. I think that story speaks for itself. It's rather spoiled by commentary. We don't need to say anything. What more can you say except this king was of a very different turn of mind than the others, was he not? You got the point. This is a good man, this Darius. Some doubt in history as to who he was exactly, but he was very sympathetic. He didn't like the law of the Medes and Persians, which couldn't be revoked. But nothing he could do about it. That's interesting. Couldn't change the constitution. However, he's quite confident that Daniel will be rescued, and as he was. Beautiful story. I love the way that's written. It's so unphilosophical, so straightforward, so easily understood. Black and white, God is either there doing something or is not. In this case, it wasn't time for Daniel to die. Then you will say, well, those poor children that got eaten up, they suffered the fate that comes from belonging to parents that are rotten, in this case.
Someone's asking about, so it says as he had been doing previously, where did Daniel acquire that threefold prayer ritual?
Well, it's not, yes, praying 3 times a day is found, I think, somewhere else, maybe not. I don't know.
My note, well, the part about praying toward Jerusalem,
yes.
It's verse 10, is a practice suggested by David and Solomon, Psalm 5:7 and 1 Kings 8:33.
Yes, that's right. Evening, morning, and afternoon.
And then Daniel's example is one of legitimate disobedience to government.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point.
Another example.
That's a good example.
Civil disobedience.
Along with the midwives who refused to kill the children. And in Acts 5, where Peter says we ought to obey God rather than man. We cannot stop preaching the gospel, Peter said. He disobeyed the authorities. And here's a great example of disobeying for the sake of obeying the higher authority of God. It's good.
It's also the appearance of an angel here.
Yes. An angel indeed.
Verse,
right, so it's the parallel there. 22.
Yes.
6:22, the parallel with the angel in the oven,
yes.
who is not Jesus.
No.
Obviously.
No, obviously it can't be there before you're born.
It's the same word in the Greek. The Greek translates it angelos, and it's the same in 4, was it 21, I think. Someone called, going by the nickname Telmo.
Telmo, yes.
An ex-JW made a book on the, correct me here, I think they're talking about the 144, going on about the JW thing. He was given the task to make the case, for the year 607.
Okay.
So this ex,
Caucasian.
but in the end he saw that the watchtower was wrong.
Yes.
He thinks there's video of this person on YouTube, and they just wanted to mention.
That might be the book called Gentile Times Reconsidered. I forget the author.
It's a video, not a book.
There's also a book called Gentile Times Reconsidered by a Norwegian author who was a Jehovah's Witness and I think found the same thing.
The name?
I've forgotten the name offhand. I have the book at home. Yes, they had to argue for 607, and that turns out not to be the correct date. But that's such a mistake because no date setting is permissible until you get to the last 3.5 years or 7 years before the second coming. Then you could venture some dates, but until you get there, as to say, the appearance of the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, verse 15, is the only clear sign that you're approaching the immediate end, I would say.
Okay, they sent the link.
Good.
According to August 25 organizational data published in the 2015 yearbook of JW's, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sorry, it's just the information about it. So it's called Jehovah's Witnesses Cult Exposed documentary. So
Interesting, right?
There's a lot of. It's got a lot of views. Yeah. Well, last year it's got 2.3 million views.
Yes.
There's a lot of ex-JWs out there.
Right.
Knocking the tower, trying to knock it down.
That's right. So you can spend a little time on the internet during the week, going to those sites and putting in your comment. The comments are very instructive often. The author of that book comes from Olaf, a Norwegian Olaf, O-L-A-F, Johnson, I think. Olaf, first name. It's called The Gentile Times Reconsidered. That changed the face of the Jehovah's Witnesses, at least those who were at least a fraction open-minded. They could see the system was not God's system, because they got the date setting wrong. That's always a very bad sign.
There's also a famous guy who died. France.
Oh.
Raymond France wrote a book called The Crisis of Conscience. That's a former Jehovah's Witness. I met him before he died. Raymond France, F-R-A-N-Z, and the name of the book was Crisis of Conscience. There's another book called 50 Years, a Watchtower Slave, or 20 years, 25 years, a Watchtower Slave. I think the man's name was Decker, I'm not sure, but that's a good read. If you are of that group of people coming out of sometimes second, third generation Jehovah's Witnesses, not that everything they teach is wrong, of course, but there are some very serious issues there in terms of Jesus being an angel is in every regard most improbable, in fact false, because Hebrews 1 verses 3 and 13 says, to no angel did God ever say, you're my begotten son. Therefore Jesus could not be an angel, and an archangel is a senior angel. You mustn't try to escape that logic by saying, well, an archangel is not an angel. I'm afraid that an archangel is an angel, simply a senior angel.
Like a queen bee is still a bee.
Queen bee is still a bee.
Well, he was comment here about the scripture which is read. A state legislated feared the God of Israel.
Yes.
Referendum. How many? This person wonders how many became monotheists out of this referendum. Randy found the via YouTube.
Yes.
About the Elohim.
Yes.
Echad. But I'm warning our fellow Christians that Tovia is obviously thinks Jesus is a false Messiah.
Yes.
Obviously the apostles are false, and he can be dangerous for those uninitiated. So be careful with Tovia. Cyrus sent people back to their homelands. He encouraged the Jewish people to return and rebuild their temple.
He's therefore called Messiah. Cyrus is called Messiah.
Isaiah 40.
He's the anointed one. Anointed one, of course, is Messiah. So you might finish today with Luke 2:11, which says that Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem, the angel said, is the Messiah Lord. He's the Christos Kyrios, the Messiah Lord. Satan's trick is to equivocate on the word Lord. Satan keeps saying, there you go, Jesus is called Lord. Well, guess what? God is called Lord. Therefore, Jesus is God. That's false. Jesus is called the Lord Messiah, Luke 2:11. God is not the Lord Messiah. He's the Lord Adonai, the Lord God. So you can unravel all the world's problems, in the church at least, by going at Psalm 110 verse 1 and explaining that God and Jesus are two distinct persons against the oneness people, and that God is God and Adonai, my Lord, is always non-deity all 195 times.
So just before we finish, once again, as people were asking about that web episode you're doing in a couple of weeks, there's the link, if you can see it. If not, I'll send out an email.
Right.
So Anthony has titled it, Why I'm a Biblical Unitarian, a Conversation. So it's a conversation.
Yes.
People on Facebook, I see a lot of people thinking it's a debate. It's not a debate.
No.
We have been invited to present the biblical, but this works like a Skype thing. So there's going to be a lot of people on the other side peppering us, I'm sure, and mostly Trinis with questions. So this is September 10, if you can't see that. It's a Saturday, and it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern. I guess that's the Eastern. So, well, So next week you're away, and we'll let you know. The topic, I guess. So you'll be back for Daniel 7.
Daniel 7 will do, God willing, 2 weeks from today.
All right. We didn't pray, so maybe we should
Yeah.
close with
Let's close with prayer. I can do that.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Hold on a sec. If any prayer requests out there, Michelle's, I think they're stable.
Good.
She hasn't. I hope her. So, any prayer requests? Wait for them.
Maxime always. Maxime in Russia.
Yes, and Candace in Texas.